90% skill, 15% concentrated power of will, 5% pleasure, 50% pain, 100% reason to remember the name.
Okay, so we're back with more Sex at Dawn discussion.
Yay, Sex at Dawn. I'm a big fan. Actually, that's not true. I'm not a big fan of Sex at Dawn. I prefer sex in the evening, you know, shower together, give each other a little wash down.
Just to specify, having sex at dawn can also work with chicks, girls, women.
But yeah, I don't know. You know, I know there's some people. Are you a Sex at Dawn person?
Probably not.
Not really.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, some people they love to get a go at it in the morning. But if I do that, I'll just go to sleep and then there's just more sleeping. I won't get done. I won't get anything done all day long if I have sex at dawn. But that's, you know, the actual action of Sex at Dawn. As for the book, I think it's fantastic. So last time we discussed the biology a bit, and we talked about some things like how men seem to be designed to be able to have sex with many different partners. We talked about the sperm war and how there's different types of sperm that do different jobs, and the design of the penis. Is
We talked about the differences between pre-agricultural society and post-agricultural society. So, you know, the way that tribes were structured differently from how modern civilizations are structured. And what having abundance in most resources and having more people on the planet makes, you know, relationships very different.
That's right. When there's scarcity, it changes things.
Yeah.
And also when the fact that you can accumulate.
Yeah, you can accumulate resources.
Resources, which is something that's new. Whereas before, you know, when you accumulated by sharing.
Right.
Okay. Great. And then we talked about I think we talked about a few other things in biology, but there's something else that I wanted to get into this time about biology, which is that women, humans, they're about the bonobos. We didn't talk about bonobos last time.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the bonobos.
And bonobos are very similar to humans in their sexual behaviors.
Yeah.
So
they're actually one of the things that Sex at Dawn talks about is that they're the most similar to humans, but they're not often credited as being the most similar.
Why is that the dimension? Why?
Just because of all I think from what I remember, a lot of the scholarly research it's very common to compare humans to chimpanzees. And chimpanzees are actually a little bit further from humans on the evolutionary, you know,
tree.
And bonobos are a lot closer, but they don't get as much comparison in scientific literature.
You know, actually, I read about. I remember reading something that said that the reason for that is that bonobos are in a much more. There are much fewer of them, and they're much more remote parts of Africa. So they're harder to study.
Right.
And I think even people weren't really that aware of them until more recent times.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay. So for those of you who want to go bonobo hunting, there you go. Okay, for us, we're gonna talk about one of the things that's really unique about bonobos and about humans, and that is that bonobos and humans are the only mammals that have concealed ovulation. Right? So, in other mammals, in chimpanzees and gorillas, etc., when a female is fertile, it's very obvious. They have these engorgements. They have these huge engorgements, these big red engorgements that, you know, they're walking around showing off that say, "Hey, come on, get it in there. Sperm wars time." Or in the case of the gorillas, it's not sperm wars time.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that it's relatively difficult for human females to get pregnant. And that's because there's really a very small window of time, right? It's really maybe 3 to 5 days out of the month when women are really actually fertile. And there's also the fact that in hunter-gatherer societies, in tribal societies, where women were breastfeeding for 3 or 4 years, in general, women are not fertile when they're breastfeeding. Now, that changed with domestication of animals, when there was milk available all year round. So that's another factor. So basically, you had all these women who were not pregnant, so their bodies are fit. There's maybe a bit of milk mixed in, but they were available, and so there's a lot of sex happening with no pregnancy happening, and they talk about how this leads to social cohesion.
Yeah.
And they talk about how with the bonobos, that sex is used in many ways to reduce tension, to bond different tribes or different families together. And they talk about how also because of that, people don't know who the children belong to.
Right.
And because they don't know who the children belong to, that's another form of cohesion. All the children are kind of belong to everybody.
Yeah, they're just children of the tribe.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Because no one knows, right?
Yeah.
Did we talk about how in some of the tribes they believed that to get pregnant a woman needed to accumulate enough sperm?
We didn't discuss this, but that's a really interesting...
Right. So, they keep in mind that the mechanism for pregnancy is something that was pretty unknown, and there were lots of different ideas around it. And one of them was that a woman needed to accumulate enough sperm, and once she did, then she could get pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and also there was one tribe they talked about who felt that if you wanted to have a child who was, smart, funny, and strong, then you needed to collect sperm from smart, funny, and strong people.
Yeah, yeah.
And the accumulation of that sperm would lead to a child who, had all those traits.
Right.
So, here we have something that's very interesting where we imagine that if you want to reduce jealousy, the way you do that is by, keeping a woman all to yourself. And by keeping a woman all to yourself, you don't feel jealous because she doesn't have the opportunity to interact with other males. And here they're saying, well, actually, if everyone can have a go, then there's no reason for jealousy.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting. I mean, we talked a lot about jealousy in another one of our discussions.
Yeah.
And what's your what do you think about this whole jealousy and how and possessiveness and culture? I mean, do you think there's a difference between the way we look at it? So, for example, in the Western world versus in Asia.
Well, first of all, I want to say that in Sex at Dawn is a really eye-opening book, especially if you consider yourself to be maybe a more jealous person. It's very interesting to read this book and think about things from a different perspective and try and look at it from the perspective of, okay, well, jealousy is just something that arises because of the sort of societies that we find ourselves in today, where you have this emotion of jealousy that's really a reaction to scarcity. And it's an attempt to control something that you have, or it's a manifestation of fear that you're going to lose something, right? And in modern society is sort of structured, modern developed society, I should say, is sort of structured in this way where you're trying to accumulate resources and keep them to yourself, and it's a very like kind of isolated sort of situation where it's just you against the world, and this is not the way that humans were living in tribal societies a long time ago. So it's really kind of weird to read this book and think about times when you felt jealous, and then look back and say, oh well, can I look at this from a different frame or a different point of view? Like, how would I feel if my life was more set up like these tribal societies, or how would I feel if things were structured in a different way? Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to. This is another. We were talking in the last podcast, the last Sex at Dawn podcast, about how it's important to read different things and find different resources. And I think this is one of those examples where I would have never thought about things from this perspective unless I read this book.
Right.
Because a lot of people just assume that certain emotions are natural and they're like human emotions, and really it's more of a response to how the environment that you're in and how your social life is set up.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have to learn. There's a lot of things that we have to learn to be afraid of. Right. And people aren't aware of this, but there's they've done some studies and they show that humans are more naturally. It's easy for them to develop a fear of spiders and a fear of snakes, and it almost seems like that could be almost genetically inherited. But on the other hand, it's very hard comparatively to get children to be afraid of cars or getting hit by a car.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, we have to learn through experience. I remember once I was reading, this is a totally other book, and in that book they were talking about how that in some it was a book about economic development, and they were talking about how a lot of people look at poorer, less developed places and go, wow, that's really beautiful, they live in harmony with nature. And he was saying, that's easy for people who are living in, New York or Colorado or something to say.
Right.
But if they had to watch their kids, on a dirt floor in the house playing with cockroaches, they probably wouldn't feel that way. And I thought that was really interesting because we would never think of playing with cockroaches.
Yeah.
Because we learn that you see a cockroach and it's like, ugh, and it's like this really disgusting thing.
Yeah.
And you it's definitely not something you play with. It's something you either run away from or you squash it and kill it, pretty much.
Yeah.
And and that's an example of how we develop we learn how we're supposed to respond to to something. And I think it's the same here with a lot of jealousy. You're supposed to be jealous if if a girl you're dating kisses somebody else, for example.
Right.
And the other thing that was just interesting, we were talking about this morning, is how recently there seems to be this trend to talk about cuckolding.
Yeah.
So maybe we should maybe you want to explain what that is, maybe in case people don't know.
Yeah. So
especially for those of you who maybe aren't American, you may not be aware.
So cuckolding is let's look up the definition. I'm sure Urban Dictionary has a good definition.
Let's look it up on Urban Dictionary.
They've always got us covered. Okay, Urban Dictionary for cuckold. Let's find the one with the highest rating. Top definition. Cuckold. Not simply a man whose wife/girlfriend cheats on him, but rather a man who gets sexually aroused by knowing or seeing her in sexual situations with other men, such as flirting, kissing, fondling, or sex. In particular, situations where he is not participating, but instead marginalized, just observing, or even completely ignored. And then the in-sentence usage is, you should have seen Frank smiling as his wife was flirting with other men at the club, even allowing them to grope her. I swear, it was giving that crazy cuckold a hard-on. That is the top definition of cuckold on UrbanDictionary.com.
Yeah, and so, it's interesting because one of the other things they talk about in Sex at Dawn is they say that when, I think this is in Sex at Dawn, either it's in the book or it's in their talk, and they say that if you look up gangbang, there are a lot of porn. There's a lot of gangbang porn, and it seems pretty clear. There was the recent LeBron James, somewhat recent scandal where this woman was in some kind of gangbang that included LeBron James, and there's a lot of that. Whereas reverse gangbang, there's not nearly as many returns.
Right.
And I certainly I have a friend, the dude who you've yet to meet, but you will soon, hopefully. The dude who he regularly has sex with women while their husbands watch, and the husband is really turned on by this. And I've suggested that that maybe what this is a situation of someone is playing with your toy that you weren't playing with, but now that someone else is having fun with it,
it's suddenly more attractive.
Yeah, so I've always thought about it from that angle. But I mean, but that's clearly in the gangbang situation. That's not what's happening, right? In the gangbang situation, everybody is getting a piece. Yeah. And they enjoy that piece, and they enjoy that they all enjoy that piece.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that perspective. As you were saying, it's if you learned that that's totally cool and fun, then
right.
And as another example, although this is maybe a more gruesome example. There's a lot of, in war, this seems to be really common that guys will share a woman.
Yeah, and even guys who would otherwise not be doing this in normal life.
Right, they absolutely wouldn't. But here's a group of guys who are having this really intense bonding experience. And in our culture, we tend to see it as women being victimized by this. But I think the idea in a tribal society wouldn't be that the woman is being victimized, because these are all men that she likes and
knows very well.
Right, and knows very well, exactly. So it's not some stranger who's imposing himself.
Yeah, right.
This is presumably, if you look at the way Sex at Dawn sees it, here's a woman who she's only gotten 7 minutes of pleasure.
Yeah, right, right.
And that's not
a girl.
And that she's nowhere close to, as people in the West like to say, the big O, because of course in the West you're only allowed to have one.
Yeah, right. It's the.
So and she needs at least 2 more guys before she's gonna get there, because on average women take 20 minutes and guys take only 7. So if you look at that, and there's a lot of this sort of sharing stuff that happens in the margins of of society. There's the women the I can't believe I'm bringing this up, but there's the porta potty. there's the porta potty girls who are paid by Arabian sheiks, or sheikhs is the correct pronunciation, by Arabian sheikhs to go on these party boats where they are shared. And so there's a lot of evidence to suggest that when men have the opportunity, and when they're not in a context, a standard relation, standard what was the word, traditional context, that they enjoy engaging in, multiple men enjoying one woman, or multiple men enjoying multiple women.
Yeah.
But it's just that's not acceptable in our culture.
Right.
And the other example they cited. Do you remember the example about how the whole orgy thing started in America? Do you know about this? Maybe this wasn't in Sex at Dawn.
No, but you can explain it.
So what they were saying is that the whole orgy scene, or the concept of orgies, not the concept, but the practice of it, got to be very popular among World War II pilot families. And there was this strong bond among the pilots. The death rate was very high. And so this served as sort of, once again, as like a social cohesion thing where they would all get together and party. And, part of this meant that, if you were to die and, your wife is now all alone, she would get a lot of support because people were more emotionally invested in her. Other people around her, other men around her, other women around her were more invested in her.
Right.
And so this is an example of a sort of modern tribe situation.
Yeah.
So, it's quite clear that this is not as marginal as we tend to think it is. Mm-hmm. There's really a lot of evidence for this dynamic.
Right. And another thing is that, I think a lot of people, they look at these sort of things like, orgies or, like gangbangs and all this stuff, or, cuckolding, or they look at this and they're like, that's so strange. No one does that. No one does that. And I think especially in the West, it's very common for people to have this belief that because something deviates pretty far from what's accepted in mainstream culture, that no one is doing it.
Yeah.
And that's totally wrong. And if you even just look at the evidence on if you read Sex at Dawn, they talk about this, or if you look at the evidence on porn sites and you look at what people search for, there's people who are interested in everything, and that doesn't, and that means that it's not right or wrong. It's just that mainstream society just doesn't deem it to be something that's acceptable in the normal context of a society. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that was really great for me in reading Sex at Dawn was that it made me go, hey, you know what? It's okay if I'm not jealous in this situation. Because I think maybe there's a lot of people who maybe, they encounter a situation and they're not actually jealous, but they think they should be, and then they think there's something wrong with them.
Right.
Whereas, when you read something like Sex at Dawn, you go, hey, you know what? Maybe it's okay that I'm not actually jealous about that. I mean, I have to say, I do get a tremendous amount of enjoyment out of the idea that other guys are into my girl.
Yeah.
Which is, maybe there's a lot of guys who really don't like that, but I certainly do. I think it's great if other guys, want to sleep with my girl.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm at the point. I'm pretty sure I'm not at the point where I feel very comfortable with the idea of other guys having sex with my girl, but
not a cuckold yet.
no. But it certainly is interesting. I remember with my first Japanese girlfriend, because she was before she was my girlfriend, she was like seeing other guys, and so there was like kind of some discussion about this, and I remember suggesting that maybe it would be okay with me if she was on top because she's then using them for her pleasure.
Right.
But I don't know that I like the idea of somebody else, pounding away on my woman, But if she's sort of using him like a dildo, maybe that would be okay with me.
Yeah.
It's sort of interesting to do these sort of mental experiments. What about you? Have you ever entertained the idea of letting another dude bang, a girl that you're seeing?
Yeah, I've thought about this because one of my friends actually he asked me if I would be okay with that, and I was like, yeah, sure. It would have to be probably with like a really good friend, I guess, and someone who I knew really well. And I guess I
know you pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you bring the woman, I'll bring the hard penis.
Yeah, social
and
cohesion,
and a bottle of wine.
Yeah. Oh, it's really classy. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess with depending on the situation, I would maybe be okay with it. If it was just some random guy though, it's sort of I don't know if I really like that idea.
Yeah, it's interesting because
again, I wonder how much of this is just like me responding to like how I was raised and the culture, right? And how much of this is actually like my actual feelings.
Right. Well, a lot of people they say that jealousy is largely based on a fear of loss, right?
Right.
And maybe and the fear of loss is based on a few things. You have the concern. Well, what if she likes having sex with him better, for example?
Right.
Or there's the idea that there's sort of the idea that if a woman or if a man sleeps with somebody else, then they're doing that because they're not satisfied.
Right.
With you, which is interesting because on one hand, that's like people have their favorite restaurant, but that doesn't mean they want to eat there every day.
Yeah, exactly.
Or they have their favorite food, but that doesn't mean they want it every day. Sometimes they want to have something different.
Yeah, and I think even one of the even better comparisons in human relationships is that a mother doesn't love one of her children any more than the others.
Well, yeah, or she's not supposed to.
She's not supposed to.
But the point is that the love for one child doesn't preclude.
Exactly. Yeah.
Love. It's not like there's not enough love.
Yeah. Exactly.
Sorry, you're the third. Sorry, the love's all gone.
Yeah. It's over and done with.
Too late. Should have showed up second.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really an important consideration in that the idea that love is not some finite resource. Really what's finite is time and attention.
Yep.
But it's interesting because when we were talking about, earlier today we were talking about marriage, and when you were talking about your parents' situation, and you were saying that they, even though they were in the same house, they were often spending time doing very separate things.
Right.
And and so that sort of goes in to say, well, if they're doing separate things anyway, what difference would it make if they were doing those separate things with somebody else of the opposite sex?
Right.
And
then that's like one of the interesting things about the way humans think about relationships, right? Where they like kind of sandbox relationships as this special thing. Mm-hmm. And in relationships, it's like it's okay if I can't spend time with my significant other because they're working.
Yeah.
But it's not okay if they're with someone else, even though my experience is roughly the same.
Yeah. Well, but what's really funny to me is like if they were with a girlfriend going, having dinner, that would be okay. But if they were at dinner with a guy,
it's totally different. Yeah.
It's really...
Yeah, it's the same, the experience on my side of that. If I'm the significant other in that relationship, my experience is the same. She's not with me.
Right.
And so my feelings probably shouldn't be all that different, but for the reason we just discussed, because culture plays such a huge part in the human experience, you kind of have to question that, and you have to look at it from a different angle. Biology and culture, man.
Biology and culture. I think I missed a reference there. Did I miss a reference just now?
Yeah, the guy who said that biology always trumps culture.
Oh God. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Actually, we wanted to bring that up, right? Because really the fact that there are multiple interpretations based on different cultures,
right?
But we all have the same biology is very clear evidence that biology doesn't trump culture.
Yeah.
But what I guess you see sort of, what we would call deviant behavior.
Yeah.
And, and that deviant behavior is where biology and culture don't match up.
Yep.
And, clearly there's a lot of, and I think we talked about this briefly in the last discussion on this. And, there's all sorts of things that are considered to be deviant by our culture that people are actually doing, which just goes to say, well, maybe they're not deviant, maybe the culture is deviant.
Exactly. Right.
I mean, after all, the biology was here first.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And also that another point on that same thread is that the culture as we see it today in modern civilization is something that we sort of forced on ourselves. It's not something that evolved very naturally. We forced it because we started doing things that weren't the way that humans were normally acting. And so you have to think about which behaviors you have that are forced and which ones are more natural, and how do you feel about doing those different things. Just really like surveying everything and kind of weighing how you feel about it, because most people don't think about how they actually feel about things.
I wanted to bring up another example from earlier on you were talking about scarcity,
right?
And I saw this series of lectures that we'll link to it. It's in YouTube, and it's a series of lectures by a Yale professor, and he's discussing reproduction. And one of the things he talks about in terms of cultures is he says that cultures are that in any culture you have the problem of scarcity, or you can have the problem of scarcity, and the way that you don't have the problem of scarcity is by managing your population growth. And he was saying that different cultures, their sexual practices will manage their reproductive rate in different ways, and that you really, the way it probably works is that there's all sorts of different cultures arise, and that the ones that have a culture that manages reproductive growth the best is the one that survives.
Yeah.
And so he used an example of, one example that he used is that traditionally in China, this isn't based on my China experience, so I don't know, but he was saying that traditionally in China, that the married couple will sleep above their grandmother or something, and so when they're making too much noise, the grandmother will get upset with them and tell them to be quiet, and then that is the end of the sex. So that's one of the ways that they manage their reproductive, the amount of children that are being born. Earlier on I talked about the length of time that women are breastfeed, and that sort of thing. And so it's the reason I'm bringing this up is because scarcity is one of the things that leads to, so one of the ways that humans developed to deal with scarcity, or one of the technologies, was agriculture.
Right.
And then agriculture marked a very huge shift in the way humans lived. And it didn't mark a huge shift in our biology. I mean, there was no shift in biology, really. Yeah. And that, what they say in Sex at Dawn, I'm pretty sure this is in Sex at Dawn, is that or maybe this isn't in Sex at Dawn. But anyway, this is in, or I read this in What's Good About Men, How Cultures Flourish by Exploiting Men. And it talks about how when you have that men in the modern times, or not only modern times, but I mean from the agricultural period, men produce more wealth than women, and certainly more than children, which wasn't necessarily the case in the hunter-gatherer times. I mean, there's actually a lot of recent research showing that women collected maybe like 60% or something of the food that is consumed, and men collect 40%. But the reason why that's valuable is that 40% is high in protein, and because it's high in protein, that means that you can have, you can be stronger,
right.
and being stronger means that, you can
collect more resources.
Right.
Yeah.
And certainly, that made you better off in war and whatever. And so that marriage is largely, he says that it's largely a wealth transfer vehicle. It's a way of transferring wealth from men to women and children. And that wouldn't have been necessary in a hunter-gatherer society because there wasn't the ability to accumulate, as we talked about previously.
Right.
The other thing about marriage is that so marriage is a way of managing or distributing possessions. Mm-hmm. And in a culture where you don't share, which is, pretty much agricultural society, when you don't share, then, that becomes very important that you accumulate. Because if you don't have enough and, you die, then your wife is going to have to be able to support her and all the kids all by herself. Which, once again, may not have been that challenging in a hunter-gatherer time when, she could have one, when she's breastfeeding for a long time, she has one kid on her arm while she goes out and collects food. But if she's got 5-6 kids, that becomes very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't know. Is there something else that...
I think on that topic, we covered most of it. What was the next thing you had?
That's pretty much, I think, everything that we have here on the list.
Yeah, the one other thing that I wanted to talk about that I just remembered today is the discussion in Sex at Dawn about how women they have more fluidity in their sexual preference.
Oh.
Than men. So they did this study where they had men and women, each administered the study, in isolation by themselves. And they were shown a series of images, mm-hmm. Ranging all different kinds of things, all different kinds of sexual content, ranging from very mild to very explicit, and showing different races, different sexes, all different kinds of things were shown to
including animals,
right? Including animals, right? Were shown to both men and women, and when the people were shown these images, they were asked, they were given a scale and they were asking, how aroused are you, or are you aroused at this image? And they had to answer, and then their results were collected. But they were also hooked up to some kind of apparatus that measured their actual biological arousal.
Right.
And what they found is that men were very simple in terms of what they were aroused by. They were, gay men were aroused by images of other men. Straight men were aroused by images of women, and they didn't deviate.
Or two women.
Yeah. They didn't deviate too far from their normal preferences. Whereas women were all over the place. They would often say they were aroused very little when they were actually being aroused a lot biologically. Whereas men, it usually matched up. Their biological arousal matched what they were saying, and women seem to try and conceal this more.
I think it wasn't that they were concealing it. I think it was that they got it wrong. When it was something that was, if they identified as heterosexual, if they saw a man and a woman having sex, they identified themselves as being really turned on. And then when they saw, let's say, two women having sex, they would say, "Oh no, I'm really not turned on." And on both ways, they were wrong. In the heterosexual situation, they thought they were more turned on than their body was saying.
Right, that's true.
And in the lesbian example, they thought they were less turned on than they actually were. But it didn't only have to be lesbians; it could be anything.
But they also said that they did two different tests. One of them was done, and the women were told that the scientists would see their answers. And in another test, they were told no one would see their answers. And the women who were told that no one was going to see their answers were generally more honest,
right,
with their biological reactions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it seems
with their ratings, you mean?
Yeah, with their ratings.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was very interesting that women were are a lot more sexually fluid than men.
Yeah, that's right. There's actually an entire book about that.
Oh yeah, which book?
I can't remember. Sexual Kimchi recommended it.
Oh okay.
I saw it in a bookstore and I sort of flipped through and I was like, okay, I don't really need to read this because really, I mean, it's a very simple concept. It just says that women don't they don't have such strong preferences, and we have a friend who his sister, essentially when she has access to good men, she dates men, but when she doesn't have such great access to men, she dates women.
Right.
And we were talking about another a girl that you knew, who she was saying that there was another girl she thought was really hot and she would be willing to have sex with her, but she was not.
Right. She wasn't interested in other women. Only that specific girl.
Right.
And who knows again if that's true or if that's only what she's admitting to, but then there's actually other girls that she's also interested in. We just don't know because, again, women are very complex.
Right. But it does fit into sexual fluidity, which is, I'm not into women, generally speaking, but this particular woman...
Right. There's no specific rules. It's very, very open.
Right. Whereas men, I don't think I certainly have never felt, I'm not into men, but hey, that man.
Right.
I think I might be up for something with him. I mean, It's just, But
what they generally say is that men can develop, like, sexual fetishes, but they have to develop them very early on. Mm-hmm. And if they don't develop them very early on, they just won't have those preferences in life. Whereas women have this plasticity where they can develop like new tastes and new things that they're into much later in life. Mm-hmm. And men don't have that, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, maybe that's because they were afraid that, if men would spend their entire time humping random objects.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Needed to shut it off.
Yeah, need to shut it off. All right, let's expose them when they're young, and then let's cut it off.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll be running around crazy.
Yeah. Not to say that enough craziness doesn't already happen.
Yeah. Keep in mind, I'm not against you humping random objects for the rest of your life.
Or silicone love dolls.
Or silicone love dolls, for that matter. Yeah. Go for it. So, for me, I just really enjoyed Sex at Dawn because it gave such a different perspective on the standard narrative, and it gave alternate explanations for all of these behaviors that, previously it seemed like, there's only one solution, and it didn't really match the standard narrative, didn't match what I've seen. It didn't really match my own experience all that much. And, so that was really great for me.
Yeah, same. I definitely have the same thoughts. And, if anyone is listening to this and is very interested in reading the book, I recommend go and read Sex at Dawn, but also read some of the other books in evolutionary psychology. Like read, The Origin of Virtue and
the Selfish Gene,
The Red Queen. We'll list a bunch of books on the podcast page that you can check them out. But it's really important to read all these books because humans we're still very confused by human psychology, right? Yeah. And the only way you can get a close to clear picture of it is by reading all this stuff and really kind of deriving your own opinion. Because no single book is all true. Right?
That's right.
There's little bits and pieces of gold in each of these books. So definitely go check out some of the stuff that we recommended in this talk.
Right, absolutely. And, I think, actually, there is one other thing I just remembered, when we were talking about one of the reasons people are averse to this idea is because, they perceive that, if you're having sex with, there's something wrong with you. If you're having sex with someone who you don't truly love.
Right.
Or
even if you have desires that are just kind of strained by mainstream taste.
Right, yeah. And so, for me, I think that, and not just for me, but one of the reasons, and we've mentioned this many times, it's really important to get out there and read is because, and expose yourself, is because, I don't mean expose yourself in public. I don't mean that.
If that's your thing, who are we to
that's
judge?
True. If that's your thing, I'm just concerned for you ending up in jail. That's what I'm.
Yeah.
But there's this idea that people have to act a certain way, and if they act differently, then it's wrong. And this gives you the ability to say, there's other ways to behave, and they're not really wrong. And I think that's really one of the major values of this book, because it's really the only book that I've read that provides this idea that, hey, if men and women want to have sex with lots of different people, that doesn't mean that they're morally deficient or that they're and that they're these evil people who are trying to outsmart. There's the standard old school pickup perspective is that there's the provider male and then there's the alpha male. And the provider male, is someone the woman is just using to extract resources out of, and the alpha male, the player, is the guy that she goes to for sexual enjoyment. And this idea that's put across in Sex at Dawn completely eliminates these categories.
Yeah.
And just says women like to have sex with people, generally with people that they feel some kind of closeness to.
Yeah.
And that's all there is to it. And it's not about some game playing or people trying to guys trying to impregnate women so someone else can take care of them and raise them. It's not about that at all. And I think that realizing that this is pretty natural and normal, and that in a different context that would be totally okay and acceptable and maybe even encouraged.
Yeah. And on that same topic, I think that those are kind of toxic mindsets where people get into people who get into pickup or get into and even just general self-improvement a lot of times, and they start reading all these books and they're like, oh, women are just using men, and men are like so subservient to women, and these women are like lying and cheating and stuff, and sort of like this red pill mindset where you're going on to like this really extreme place, and you're looking at yourself as a victim in the eyes of, in terms of, how society treats you, or how women treat you, or, how people at work treat you and stuff. And I think that's really toxic because even if that is what's happening, you're only going to like, by viewing it that way, you're only doing damage to your own psyche.
Yeah. And
that's really not healthy. And I think that by reading books like this, you get a more balanced perspective, and you look at, hey, this is not the way it is. It's much more complex than that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that kind of red pill thinking, it really simplifies a lot of things into these black and white perspectives, where people are using other people, and then that's not really what's happening.
Yeah, and maybe at some point it would be valuable for us to talk about this sort of red pill thinking, and this men go their own way movement.
Yeah.
Right? And some of these other movements that are out there that have really made it so that men are very antagonistic towards women. And I think it'd be great if we
we should definitely discuss that, and also like that and that in relation to feminism, and like how red pill is kind of a reaction to feminism in the West, and how the two kind of ideologies clash,
and how it's really great that we live in Asia and don't have to deal with that.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
That's not to say it's all roses and what's the right term? I'm losing the idiom.
I don't know.
Anyway, it's not all sweetness and light. All right,
Yeah.
There we go. I changed it.
Yeah.
But it is to say that they have a different structure and a different way of dealing with with our biology,
Right.
and with the allocation of resources. They have just a different way of dealing with it than we deal with it in the West, and it's equally valid. And for me, it's definitely better.
Yeah, I agree. So. So I guess that wraps it up for our discussion on Sex at Dawn.
Excellent.
And go do some reading, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yes, we will. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Yep.
Bye-bye.